Today I'm going to go into a detailed description of how I make my thread painted bouquet memorials for pets who have passed. And people always ask me if I have a tutorial. I do. I also have a pattern available, but it's kind of a difficult thing to write a tutorial for just based on how I actually do this. So I'm going to actually show the process. So generally speaking, I will get whiskers from people. They mail them to my house. And I'm looking for whiskers that are pretty thick and sturdy, at least around the base, because that's where I'm going to affix them to the fabric using a method called couching. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And once I have selected the whiskers, I will be back. Okay, so I've selected my whiskers and I've kind of got them sorted in order of length. I want to put the longest ones in the middle of the piece and have the shorter ones follow the curve to give the shape of the bouquet. So the reason why this is kind of difficult to write a pattern for is because each whisker is very unique. And so I like to just see how it likes to lay the best. And that's what's actually going to form the shape of it. I don't really plan anything out and I don't mark the fabric at all. So I'm going to start right here. So I have one strand of floss with a knot on the end. I'm going to bring that up through the back of the fabric at the base of the whisker, and I'm going to very tightly make a single straight stitch across. The tension from this straight stitch is going to be what holds the whisker in place, and as you can see, it kind of is pulling up a little bit. That's because we want to make sure we have enough anchoring to keep it in place. Now, I like to keep the flow of the whisker the same, so you can kind of push that. I like it to be kind of flush against the fabric, but you can kind of have them pointing out if you would like as well. And you're going to want to keep these stitches really, really tight together and make sure you're pulling tight as well, because the only thing that's keeping this there is the tension. I usually do 3 to 4 stitches per whisker. And I do it at this area at the base because this is where I'm going to cover with the twine at the end. Now I'm going to put the next whisker very close to this one. I chose this one because it's standing a little bit more straight up. And we're going to go through this again with our anchoring couching stitches. And I will give you a close-up on this as well, so you can really see what I'm doing. You're going to continue this process until you have all the whiskers that you would like added onto your fabric. One of the most common questions I get asked is like, can I do this with black whiskers? And I'm like, of course you can. Yeah, just use a lighter fabric. If you'd like them to show a little bit more, you can use a darker embroidery floss to match the whisker at the bottom if you choose. I'm not going to do that just because I'm going to cover this area anyway. But yeah, of course you can do this with black whiskers as well. You can kind of use your fingers to roll the whiskers into different orientations. I really like how that looks, so I'm going to stop and I'm going to add the rest of them on and then I'll be back. So now that I have all the whiskers that I would like on here, I'm going to show you how I end the thread. So I have a hoop stand, which makes this a lot easier. Let me try to get this in the shot. I'm going to take my needle that still has the thread attached to it. I'm going to run it underneath these stitches on the back side. I just want to go under the stitches. I'm not trying to go through the fabric. It's the tension between the fabric and the stitches that's going to hold this in place. And I'm going to do this in a couple different areas. I like to usually do like 3 or 4 different times, depending on how tight the stitches are. And that's what's going to keep it in place. And then I will snip this away. Now, if you're coming here from TikTok, you'll know sometimes I save the twine for last and sometimes I do it first. Today, I'm just gonna get it out of the way so I can show you how I cover up these stitches at the bottom quickly. I'm gonna take 2 strands of my brown floss and I'm gonna thread them into my needle, and we're gonna make straight satin stitches across this area. This is going to provide us with a little bit of extra tension and hide those couching stitches. Once I have my needle threaded like this, I got a knot on one end, I have the tail end here. I'm going to bring my needle up through the bottom. I'm going to go across, straight across, and cover up those couching stitches, and this is going to be the twine of the bouquet as well. This is the little bit of my tail on the back. You just got to reach behind and pull. Sometimes if your tail is a little bit too long, it'll pull through. That's all you have to do to get it back to the back side. There's a bunch of different ways that you can start your floss that you don't even have to deal with the tail, but I end up just using knots for the most part, but there are some other ways that you can do that if you would like to not deal with that at all. From here, I'm going to discuss a little bit about why it's hard to make a pattern for these. As you can see, there's a way that the whiskers naturally fall, and I don't really tend to plan much around that. From here, I will take a single strand of green floss, usually, thread this into my needle, and I will start to kind of build up the shape however I think looks good. So in this case, the person who has commissioned this was drawn to the dark green fabric with pink, purple, blue, and white flowers. So my mind is naturally going to a pretty cool palette. And I'm thinking I'm going to start with some lavender flowers. So if I want to start with these sprigs, I kind of want to build this up a little bit on this side. And I'm just using longer back stitch to make these stems. And I'm gonna mirror that on the other side. I don't mind if it's a little bit off, but I like to keep the bouquet looking balanced, but also have a lot of variety. But this is a good starting place. They're about equal. And then I can just set this green floss up here. This is something called parking. I have another video on that if you're interested. And then I can go in with like a purple, and I'm going to make some lavender using French knots. Now for the flowers of these pieces, I generally am always using French knots for them. And I'm using 2 to 3 strands depending on the flower and how thin or thick the actual floss is. So in this case, I'm going to start off using 2 strands and we'll see how it looks, and I'll increase it to 3 if I need to. I'm going to be using a pretty thick needle for this as well, and I'm going to thread this in here. You want to make sure that you're using floss about maybe like 10 to 11 inches. I wouldn't go much longer than a foot because you have a tendency to tangle a lot more easily. I'm going to start a little bit down on the stem and I'm going to pull this up from the back, holding the string with my left hand. I'm going to hold my needle with my right and I'm going to wrap around the needle twice and not going back into the initial entry point, but close to it. I'm going to insert the needle back and pull those coils down to meet the fabric. Now I'm going to hold this, and when it gets to about this point, I'm going to let go and pull through the rest of the way. Lavender kind of goes up like this, so I'm going to continue to make these flowers. Using this method, again, we're going to wrap around twice, insert back down, slowly pull through. There's our first one finished, and I'm going to continue on the other side. You want to be mindful about not stitching around the whiskers. If you don't want them tacked down, you can tack them down, but that's not how I do it. And the purpose of this video is just to show you how I do. You want to make sure that you avoid this, especially at this tip. They are very fragile and they can bend. Without a doubt, I'll be using that purple again, so I'm going to park it and move on to the blue flowers. A lot of people request forget-me-nots for these pieces, so I am going to use those. In this piece, that's little clusters of blue flowers. And to start that, I'm going to use some yellow floss for the centers. And now this is, again, why it's a little difficult to make a pattern. So I'm going to kind of try to visualize like how I want this to go. I think I want to have it kind of flowing out this side. So I'm going to make the centers of the flowers. And I'm going to build around them based on where I put these French knots. It doesn't matter if these yellow ones are close together because they're clusters of flowers anyhow. Thinking I want 3 very close. And then maybe like 1 or 2 more. And I'll just go ahead and repeat on the other side since I have my yellow floss on my needle already. So I'll be back when this is done. Now when you start to build up in this center area around the whiskers, you want to be very careful. Like I said before, everything is very delicate. So I would go especially slow in these areas that are a little bit harder. And I again like to stitch through, not over personally. To show you how I kind of bend these out of the way. And I hold it a little bit closer. If you ever get this little loop here, you just need to pull a little bit more on the back side. It's just because one of your threads got a little uneven. Now that I know where the center of the flowers are going to be, I'm going to take 2 shades of blue and I'm going to create the forget-me-nots by making more French knots around the yellow center. Now I do get asked a lot as well when people find my work on social media if I would create a pattern for a specific piece that they've seen. And unfortunately, the answer to that is no, just based on the fact that these are memorials. So each piece is unique and I really try to keep it that way. That's part of why I really wanted to make this tutorial so that if you see one that you like, maybe you can try to put your own spin on it for your own pet. A lot of people, when their pet has passed, like the feel of making something for them. And I love that. I want to allow people to do that. I like to use varying shades of the blue just to give the piece some depth as well. Once I've finished those flowers, I like to go in with the green and finish up their stems before moving on. I think that that just helps keep things a little bit more organized and balanced for me. You can figure out a way that works better for you if you want to do your stems last, however you may want. But this is how I like to do it. I'll go in between the whiskers at the bottom here. And work my way up. And I've already added the stems for my next row, which I'm going to make a few more lavender sprigs, and I'm going to use a lighter shade of purple. And that's going to help give the piece a little bit more depth as well. Now I'm going to work on adding a little bit more variety to the piece. I still want to add some pinks and some lighter purples and whites because that was requested. Some popular flowers that I do in these pieces are snowdrops, daisies, and sometimes I just like to add a couple that maybe don't necessarily have a true name, but kind of like a filler piece, like something along the lines of pink baby's breath, I'm thinking for this piece. It's good not to get bogged down by the idea of it has to be done a certain way. And that's why it is really difficult for me to make patterns for these pieces as well. I'm very go with the flow with them. And I think that's why they end up being such a, I don't know, a lovely memorial, because it really is just kind of go with the flow. Each pet has their own feel with their whiskers of what the bouquet is going to look like. And I think it's important to try to read that while you're stitching. So in this case, I'm going to start adding some pink, I think, maybe white. Now from here, it's all about building up and out and filling in the bouquet with your chosen design. I'm going to go ahead and stick with lavenders, and then I'm going to also add in some maybe pink and white daisies. I'm thinking maybe one more row of forget-me-nots as well. So at this point in the project, I am really happy with how it looks. My client for this one requested a little bug right here in the same design as one of their cat's toys. So I'm going to leave that space blank, but at this point, it's really all about building up until you get something that you're happy with, and I am so happy with this, so this is where I'm going to stop.